With all this talk about matcha, not enough attention is paid to the matcha plant, or the plant used to make matcha. In this video, we're going to explain what plant matcha comes from, what the matcha plant is, and how it's grown. Let's get started. So because matcha is a type of green tea, it comes from the tea plant, Camellia sinensis. All true teas have to come from this plant to be considered a tea. If an infusion comes from another plant, like peppermint for example, it cannot technically be considered a tea. The matcha plant, or Camellia sinensis plant, is an evergreen, flowering shrub native to Southeast Asia. The native growing region of the matcha plant is now what's considered northern Myanmar and China's southern Yunnan province. The matcha plant has since been transplanted all around the globe, but in general, it prefers the climate of its birthplace, with mountainous topography, mild subtropical climates, and a seasonal rainfall. Even though the matcha plant doesn't grow natively in Japan, it was brought over almost 900 years ago and has since thrived in southern and central Japan. Now all the best matcha in the world comes from Japan. This has actually posed some challenges for Japanese tea farmers, as the climate of the Japanese main island is slightly too cold for tea plants. These matcha plants risk damage from the frost in the wintertime. One solution is to change the type of matcha plant used. Through much experimentation and crossbreeding, there have been dozens of different tea plant varieties or cultivars developed. The Yabukita is now the most popular type of tea plant in Japan because it's resistant to the frost. A lot of top-tier matcha teas come from rare tea cultivars like Goko, Okumidori, and Saimidori. These plants are bred for flavor rather than frost resistance. While it's difficult to grow them in central Japan, these delicate tea plants thrive in the subtropical climate of southern Japan. The Goko tea plant produces a bold, savory flavor that a lot of matcha connoisseurs are looking for, while the Okumidori is smoother and less bitter. These are tea varieties you will see more often in southern Japan, but they can be grown in central Japan as well. The farmer will need to use certain tactics to reduce the risk of frost damage. He can use fans to blow air onto the tea plants and raise their temperature, or spray water on the tea plants to keep the temperature above freezing. Speaking of farming techniques, let's take a look at something a farmer can do to make the matcha plant taste even better. So what makes the matcha plant special compared to other types of tea plants is that the plants used to make matcha need to be shaded for 3 weeks before the harvest. This actually alters the chemical composition of the tea leaves, giving them a smoother and sweeter taste with less bitterness. When the matcha plant is exposed to sunlight, it begins to convert the amino acid theanine into catechins as a protection against the UV light. These catechins produce a bitter flavor in the tea, so if a farmer wants to maintain a sweet flavor profile, he will shade the tea plant prior to the harvest. This allows the matcha plant to produce less catechins and maximize its content of sweet and savory theanine. This method is also used to produce gyokuro, considered to be the highest quality leaf tea in Japan. The shading process maximizes the sweet and savory flavor of this famous tea, which gives it a unique flavor profile. After the 3-week shading is up, it's time to harvest the matcha plant. It's very important to select the right leaves for matcha, as different leaves produce different flavors. The youngest leaves of the matcha plant have the highest nutrient content and the smoothest and sweetest flavor, so these are reserved for premium teas like matcha and gyokuro. So how long does it take to grow a matcha plant? It takes about 4 years for a matcha plant to reach maturity, meaning that in 4 years, it's mature enough to be harvested. It will take another few years of harvesting before the matcha plant begins to take on the characteristic grows that Japanese green tea fields are famous for. People often ask how they can grow their own matcha tea plant at home, but to be completely honest, it's not really worth the investment. It takes years to grow the plant to the point where you can start harvesting the leaves, and even then, the yield is not very high. Also, you will need to take the matcha through a long, labor-intensive production process, otherwise it will be extremely bitter. It's best to leave the growing of the matcha plant to the professionals, the Japanese tea farmers. After traveling around Japan, we've met with dozens of farmers and sampled hundreds of different types of matcha teas. If you want to try some of the best matcha tea for yourself, you can go to our matcha collection at neoteas.com and search for what you want. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next time.